Well, welcome once again to worship here at Messiah in Auburn this Sunday morning, the first Sunday in the season of Lent. It's been a time of refreshment and rejuvenation for us who have been on staff here, who are on staff here at Messiah. During the first 3 weeks of February, the Church Council very kindly and graciously granted us some extra time away to refresh and renew and rejuvenate after this past year and all that went into our work and ministry here at the church. And so we want to say thank you to the council and the congregation for that time. And so it was strange for me after a couple weeks off to be sitting once again at 5:30 a.m. in my kitchen, drinking some coffee and prepping for the day ahead. It had been a couple of weeks since I did that, and some changes have happened in my life over these last couple of weeks. There, sitting at my table in my kitchen, finishing that prep, was Daisy, our new golden doodle puppy, who was wanting to play tug-of-war with me, and who, quite frankly, was not behaving as well as puppies sometimes can behave, although that's rare, I know. As I was writing and making notes, one of my sleeves of the bathrobe I was wearing was down, and Daisy decided to play tug-of-war with the sleeve on the bathrobe and had sunk her sharp puppy teeth into the fabric. And the really nasty part of that is that yesterday, my bathrobe, the one I own, she did the same thing and so had to go to the laundry. And so I was wearing Kirsten's bathrobe this morning, and unfortunately, Kirsten, your bathrobe will probably have to go to the laundry today also. I can blame it on Daisy. D-A-Z-I. No, it was all my fault. I should have been more careful. But that was a new thing going on in my kitchen as I was prepping this morning. But it got me to think a little bit about puppies. I don't know how many of you have experienced puppies in your life or in the life of your family. Puppies, and now as I mentioned, Daisy is a golden doodle, but I think this applies to many different breeds of puppies. They are feisty little creatures. And Daisy, she is about 11 weeks old now and is at the peak of her feistiness. They're crazy distractible. I mean, if you just click your finger over there, she's over there, and then over there, and she's over there, and they can be anywhere. You just sort of guide them to be. They're loving. They're extremely cuddly. They're very messy. I cannot tell you how many paper towels we've gone through in the kitchen these last couple of days. But most importantly, as pack animals, they're made for relationships. Puppies are the epitome of God's gift to us of relationship or community. And like most relationships we know in our lives, they're complicated. Working with a little puppy is a complicated, difficult, amazing, terrifying thing, just like most relationships are. And one of the themes that I want to weave into this time that we are together today is the work of relationship building that God puts into a relationship with us and motivates in us for our relationship with one another and with the world. Relationships are amazing, difficult, complicated, and it doesn't take just puppies to teach us that. We teach ourselves that, and God understands that. Thinking back when I was playing with Daisy and she was playing with the bathrobe that was not mine, thinking back to our first puppy, also a golden doodle. His name was Oscar, and he died this past October. He had been a member of our family for almost 15 years. And I remember how Oscar wore his collar with his name tag on it so proudly. To take off his collar, like when we were going to bathe him or brush him, to take that off, it almost broke your heart, because there was something about wearing that signified for him that he was part of the family. It was an outward sign of his relationship with the rest of his family pack. And the first big test for Kirsten and I in our marriage was raising Oscar up. I tell you, if it wasn't for crate training, I don't know if our marriage would have survived those months of puppiness long 15 years ago. But you snap that collar on him, and he was part of the family. And in those early years of our marriage, our relationship, Kirsten and I together, it got me thinking about what was the sign of our commitment to one another. Well, luckily, Kirsten didn't put a collar around me with my name on the name tag. No, she gave me a ring. An outward sign of being together in community, in which we live out promises that we had made to one another. And so it is not insignificant that God establishes there in Genesis a new relationship and a new work with God's people. In fact, not just with people, but with all of creation, all the animals from the largest to the smallest. God establishes a relationship and makes a sign of that relationship, not a collar with a name on it or a ring, but with a rainbow in the sky. So that every time God looks at it and we look at it, we can remember that we are made in relationship to God. And that relationship, which is called the covenant in Genesis, is an enduring, ongoing commitment on God's behalf, never again to destroy creation like God had just done. And within that promise, to build anew a world in which all things could fit together in relationship, as complicated, difficult, amazing, and messy as that can be. It kind of describes marriage, doesn't it? Amazing, difficult, messy, creative. Like I said, when a couple marries, the rings they exchange are the signs of the promises that they make, but not just the promises that they make in the moment. It's also a sign of the promise they make to the work ahead, to continuing, enlivening, deepening, growing, sustaining the relationship that they have entered into. And it is on God's behalf that Jesus, the Christ, enters into the lives of each and every one of us with just that same promise. In and through our baptisms, Jesus works in our lives to bring us to God, as 1 Peter says, to bring us into relationship. And in that relationship, God speaks clearly to us, as clear as two people standing together making their covenantal vows of marriage. God speaks to us, you are loved, as Savannah said in the Time for Children video this morning. You are loved, you are cherished, you are my beloved ones. And I pour out this love for you in order that you then may be so filled that you can pour it out upon the world. God's work in us so that we can do God's work in the world. That's what relationships are about. Whether it's between God and us or between us and one another, it's about a building up, a working up of love and grace to transform ourselves and the world around us. The work's similar and yet not quite the same as that which two people commit to do with one another when they get married. I mean, in our work with one another as partners in marriage, we know, and I know personally in my own life through my own experience, that sometimes one of the two partners chooses not to continue that work. We call it divorce in marriage, or we call it breaking up when two people have been together but they have not formalized their bond or their commitment. We know in our life together that work that's committed to can and sometimes, many times, is chosen to be stopped or set aside so that possibly something new outside of that in a new covenant could be built up. It's one of the primary differences between God's covenant-making activity with us and our covenant-making activity with one another is that God says, I will never choose to end my work in your lives. I sent my rainbow in the heaven as a commitment to you that I will never wipe out the earth again. I'm going to set myself, my will, fully and formally into an ongoing work with you. You, people of the earth, may choose not to continue your relationship with me, but I will never forsake you. You are my beloved. You are my chosen ones. It was that way with Jesus at his baptism in the Jordan. We see here at the beginning of Jesus' ministry where he's coming to be baptized by John, and just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, I love this image. The heavens themselves are torn apart. There's something so grand and amazing going on that the heavens cannot contain it. They're ripped apart. And Spirit, sometimes we think of it as this little dove comes down upon Jesus. I like to think of it as a big dove. And it floods Jesus with Spirit. Floods him with it. This work of God floods into his life. And then in the midst of it, God says, You're my chosen one. You're my beloved. I am so pleased with you, Jesus, that you've committed to taking my work out into the world. And in acknowledgement that work, like all work in relationship, is not easy, Spirit sends Jesus out into the wilderness where there's temptation and beasts and all sorts of distractions and difficulties, and yet also support. These 40 days prepare Jesus for his ultimate work on our behalf and the world's behalf that will lie ahead of him in Jerusalem. Having been prepared to be about God's work in the world, Jesus goes to Galilee and he gathers a crowd of people and he says, this is the right time. God's transformative power